All right. Welcome, Rowan. I'm so glad to have you on the show today.
It's a pleasure. It's an honor.
Wonderful. So, this is a show for educators and school leaders. And so many of them may not be familiar with your work. So could you give us just a little bit of background about who you are, what you do, and what projects you're working on?
Okay. I have been called Mr. Innovation by the media. There's a reason for that. Is that I've spent several decades focused on how companies and how individuals can enhance their innovation capability, their creative capability. Mm-hmm. So basically I've written 3 best-selling books. They're published in 25 languages. I have traveled the world, I think 65 countries, multiple times, to bring my message to the world. And I consult for major corporations, pretty much everywhere, to help them to innovate their way forward. So that's a kind of a brief
in a nutshell. Yeah. It's exciting. So, and one of my positions way back when I was actually still in schools was as I think it was the longest title I've ever seen. It was the curriculum
Not
development.
One of my book titles, was it?
Yeah, no, it was curriculum development and innovation specialist. Like I was like, let's put this all together. And it was funny because somebody asked me once, like, what do you think innovation is? And so that's what I'm going to ask you. I'm going to start with that. What exactly is innovation, and how can we leverage it?
Great question. Very simple to answer, actually. Surprisingly.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people struggle with, what is innovation? And of course, it's been thrown around so much that you think it's going out of style, as a term. But here's my simple definition of innovation: creating value by doing things differently. That's my definition of innovation: creating value by doing things differently. So there are a couple of very important elements there, more than a couple, but I'll just touch on 2. One is creating. So there's got to be some form of creativity, some newness in there. But also by doing things differently, so there needs to be some form of departure from the past. But doing things differently, for example, if you go back to, Leonardo da Vinci, he came up with some wonderful ideas about how to do things differently. Let's have a helicopter, let's have a parachute, or whatever else. But those ideas couldn't create value at the time. Why? Because we couldn't fly. We didn't have the physics in place to be able to do that. But when you combine the two, when you come up with an idea for doing things differently that actually creates value, and you can implement that, do that, like Elon Musk, for example, has done with rockets that land vertically. That's creating value by doing things differently. So there's my definition. And what was the second part of your question, Susan?
Well, it was how do we leverage that? So if we know that innovation is doing things differently, is creating and doing things differently, then how can we all leverage that, no matter what our position is or where we are and what we're doing in the world?
Well, you could apply that to your own life. Let's before you even get into sort of the creative process and education and art, whatever else, we can create value in our own lives by doing things differently. So we can literally sit down and say, okay, so what things would be of value if I changed my behavior? No, so that's kind of at the level of the person, our own lives. And very often we're talking to executives that are, let's say in a midlife crisis and thinking about their future, and it's very much what we do, but we'll get to that in a moment. But so then we get to the level of we're at school, we're trying to do something creative, for example, or in education itself. How could we create value in education by doing things differently? What things could we change that would create value? Or if you're in a company, you're running a global corporation, what things could we do differently that would create value for our customers? So it very much applies right across the board, actually. That's how we would leverage that definition of innovation.
Yeah. So the way that I was introduced to you was reading your book, The 4 Lenses of Innovation. I would love to have you touch briefly on what those 4 lenses are. Let's start there. Let's start with just what the 4 lenses are, your definition around them, and then we'll dig a little deeper into those.
Okay. Well, allow me, if I may, just to give you a very quick background on the 4 lenses, because it didn't sort of come out of nowhere. It's not just a sort of a bit of management theory. It's actually sort of management science in the sense that I was able to study hundreds of cases of innovation. So starting with, business innovation in the last decades, but then going back in time and thinking about, I don't know, Thomas Edison, serial innovator, or Henry Ford, whatever. And then going back to the Renaissance and thinking, how on earth did they come up with some of those amazing ideas, whether it's Gutenberg with the printing press or whatever. And what I was able to distill out of that study was that there are 4 particular ways that innovators tend to think. There are 4 ways, there are 4 perspectives of view that tend to open up new opportunities. And I call them lenses. So the first lens is called challenging orthodoxy. It's really about being contrarian, about doing things differently, right? So you start to ask, if everyone's zigging, what if we zag? What if we did the opposite? So it's what if and why not, and those kinds of questions. The second lens is called harnessing trends. So there are always trends in the world. There always have been, right back to, if you go back to the Renaissance or even further back, there are always trends, agricultural trends, whatever else, geopolitical trends, etc. How do we harness the trends in order to create new value? So today, of course, we have many, many trends across, a wide panorama of things that are going on very, very rapidly. How do we harness the power of change, bring it into the business model or into the educational model, whatever, to create new value? The third lens is called leveraging resources in new ways. So how do we leverage, for example, skills and assets, the things that we know how to do and the things that we own? How do we leverage them in new ways to create new value? Or how do we leverage somebody else's? So, for example, if we see that we're moving into a world of robotics and drones and AI and whatever, and we don't know how to do those things, how do we partner with people that do in order to create new value, right? And then the fourth lens is very, very simple. It's understanding needs. So it's basically about saying, let's think from the customer backward or think from the need backward and try to design solutions from the need backwards. So those are the 4 lenses: challenging orthodoxies, harnessing trends, leveraging resources, understanding needs.
Yeah. And when we're looking at those 4 lenses, does innovation only happen when you use all 4, or does innovation happen within each of those lenses themselves?
You can base a huge innovation on one trend. On one lens. I mean, so let's take the trend, for example. Let's imagine that you are Netflix, some years ago, and you had a DVD rental business. It wasn't like the Blockbuster business, so they already challenged an orthodoxy. They already said, okay, well, let's do things differently. Let's ship out DVDs rather than having stores. But then streaming video came along, streaming media, right? And so Blockbuster said, well, there's no future in DVDs. Let's shift to streaming video. So there's a trend. So you see a trend going on. That's a technology trend in that particular case. And you say, okay, how do we harness that trend in order to create new value? Whereas someone like Blockbuster says, yeah, we see the trend out there, but we've got thousands of stores. We've got 5,000-6,000 stores across the United States. We're not going to close all of those down, just to harness that trend. So to come back to your question, yes, you can build an innovation on one of the lenses, but the big, big innovations, the really game-changing stuff tends to happen at the interaction points between the 4 lenses. So if you go back to Netflix, you'll say, yes, they harnessed the technology trend, but didn't they also challenge orthodoxies? Didn't they say, okay, well, we need to shift away from DVDs to streaming, or, challenge their own orthodoxies that, hey, we're a company that ships out DVDs. Yeah, but we could challenge that. We could say, why don't we become a different kind of company? So those are 2 lenses already. How do we leverage resources in new ways? There's all this content out there that's on DVDs or wherever it is. How do we make sure that that's now streaming? We're leveraging resources in new ways and understanding needs. So in that case, us as viewers, customers, how do we then design a solution from the need backwards so that we can watch whatever we want, whenever we want, and so on, and just pay one subscription fee. So again, just as one example, it's a combination of the 4 that really leads to the big game-changing stuff.
So in your description of understanding needs, the one thing that actually stood out to me was describing it as identifying unmet or unvoiced needs and trying to address them. The idea of unvoiced needs, I think we see this within our organization, just in trying to support educators the way that we do. Oftentimes we'll send surveys and we'll ask them what their what needs they have. And it's almost frustrating because we get back, no, it's great.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Or they don't know what they don't know.
No.
And so, and I see it in schools a lot as well when, administrators come in and they want to support an innovative new effort. They have a vision for whatever that might be, and they're working with, the teachers and the staff to get them on board. And they'll ask, those point blank questions of what do you need so that I can help you meet those needs? And they get back blank stares. So how do you dig to find the unmet or unvoiced needs?
Yeah, it's a very big issue, and you're absolutely right. When you do these surveys, the point is that everyone else is locked into their own orthodoxies as well. Mm. So they have their own assumptions about the way things are. So generally, also when companies do this, they ask, "Well, what do you need?" And people say, "Well, I want the same thing, but make it cheaper, or whatever." Yeah. So it's just not going to. Or it's like if you wanted to innovate around the hospital system, healthcare, and you went up to someone laying in a hospital bed and say, "What do you need?" I mean, I'm not in a position there to try to reinvent hospitals when I'm. Yeah, so the point is that we have to really dig. You use the right term, dig deep, to try to find. Needs that sometimes people are not even aware of, or they can't envisage a solution. So I'll give an example. When I was working with a company in China called Haier, they make electronic appliances like Whirlpool, right? Mm-hmm. We went out to the rural areas of China to see how people were actually using their appliances. And we found that, for example, people were using the washing machine in some parts of China to wash not just clothes, but also vegetables. Some people were washing prawns, in the washing machines. That's true. Or making goat cheese in the spin dryer of the washing machine. So then instead of coming back and sort of making a sticker to put on the front that says "Warning, only used for intended purposes," what we did was redesign the machines and allow people to switch between functions, between washing clothes or washing vegetables or washing prawns, or even here's a recipe book on how to make great goat cheese in a washing machine. The other thing that we found was that, out in those rural areas, that rodents were coming in, underneath the machine and biting through the cables and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So we did two things. We changed the base plate of the appliances, but we also changed the wiring in there and put a kind of a metal casing over the wire. Mm-hmm. So that the rodents couldn't bite through it. So you have to go out and dig. You have to find stuff that's out there that perhaps, people are not even aware of because they just accept that this is the way things are. They can't envisage a washing machine that switches between different functions. So they just use one that's available. So unvoiced needs are really important. I mean, none of us, if you think about it, none of us needed, or let's put it this way, none of us were asking for FedEx. Nobody was asking for, Uber. No one was asking for Airbnb. Nobody was asking for Twitter. No one was asking for any of that stuff. No one was asking for an iPhone. Frankly, back in the day of, 2005, 6, no one was asking for an iPhone. But clearly we needed all of those things. We needed Instagram, didn't we? We didn't ask for it, but we need it because now we spend, so much time every day looking at it. So it's a need. So how do we somehow tap into those fundamental needs that sometimes people are not even aware of and address them? With new solutions.
So your suggestion is to go out and observe in the field. Yeah. Partly
that, but also to, for example, sometimes it's a combination. We could be looking at a technology trend, right, that's come along. So something has become now technically possible. And then we say, okay, how could we apply that to a need? So for example, I don't know, a smart walking cane for blind people. Blind people are not going to ask you for a smart AI-based cane, that uses radar or something they're not going to do that. But you could say, okay, but now we've got these new technical possibilities. What could we apply that to? What needs are out there that people are not even voicing, that we could sort of, we could match? So there are some companies, one of them is Procter & Gamble, that talk about matching what is possible with what is needed. So sometimes you start with a need and then you come back and say, how do we, like Elon Musk wants to land a vertical rocket how do we make that possible, right? There's the need. How do we match it? Or you start with a new technical possibility and you say, what needs could we match that to? What things are now becoming available that we could change in terms of people's expectations and behaviors?
Yeah. So we were talking a lot about trends. I'm curious, how do you know whether a trend is something that we want to harness versus something that's a flash in the pan? Right?
Well,
like
yeah.
I think about things like Snapchat versus TikTok. When TikTok came on the scene, I was like, this sounds like another Snapchat, which is only really based for teenagers. It hasn't really taken off for most of other folks that are using the internet. Instagram's a little bit more popular, but I was totally wrong. TikTok is totally taken off as a trend that's here to stay. So how do you know the difference?
Well, is it? That's the question. Is it here to stay? I mean, it's also generational, for example. If you'd gone back, 10, 15 years and you talked about Facebook, everyone, that's the thing, it's here to stay, but even Facebook doesn't want to be Facebook anymore. They want to be Meta, they want to be in virtual reality and so on. So it's also generational. So one generation uses something, but then their kids grow up and say, I'm not going to use that thing. It's from my parents. I'm not interested in Facebook. I want TikTok, right? But then their kids are going to say, or the next generation, not even their kids, the next generation comes, no, TikTok is from the last lot. Now we've got Whiz Bang or whatever the next thing is. So the actual platform is not the trend. No, that might be a fad or something that appeals to a particular generation, a particular time. You have to look at the underlying trend, so you might say social media it's a discontinuity, right? It's more than a trend. It's a combination of things that come together, that create a real difference. E-commerce, is not just a trend. It's a discontinuity. It's a combination of all kinds of other things that fundamentally changes retail. So I think we have to ask ourselves, is this a fad or a flash in the pan, as you say? Is it time-based? Also, could something affect the trend that would send it backwards? I'll give you an example. Before COVID, we would have all said, no, the trend is the sharing economy. We all want to share everything, right? We don't want to own anything anymore. We want to share cars. We want to share like Airbnb places. Women want to share handbags. We want to share everything. And then suddenly COVID comes along. I mean, who knew, right? And, and then the sharing economy goes backwards because now nobody wants to share cars. They don't want to share handbags. They don't want to share, apartments and things like that anymore. So we have to be aware that sometimes trends can go into reverse. But they may spring back, So the point is really in the book somewhere in the Four Lenses, I talk about trying to understand the difference between, a ripple on the ocean and a tsunami.
Yes.
Could this thing grow into a tsunami? So if you think about education and you think about something like digital transformation, is digital transformation a trend or a discontinuity? I would say that every single industry on earth, including education, has a digital destiny. There's something that's unavoidable, it's inevitable, and we better get our stuff together and figure out how, we become a part of that or we're going to die. So, I like to say that everything that can be connected will be connected. Everything that can be digitized will be digitized, So those are things this is not a trend. This is a tide of history. And, we better understand what that destiny is and we better make sure that we get to that future as fast as we can.
Yeah.
As an industry. Embracing the change.
Yeah. Well, and that leads me to my next question is, and I find this so fascinating because I keep thinking about the difficulty of getting people to embrace change, in industries that so desperately need it. I mean, I think if there's ever an industry that needs a change, it's education, particularly here in the US, it's based in the industrial model of the early, 1900s. It hasn't changed,
Nope.
In 200 years.
Nope.
And it needs to. I mean, it's so
You sound
desperate.
like me. Yours is my exact words. It hasn't changed in 200 years. It's still based on the principle of, mass production. It's mass-produced education, whatever. Yeah. Anyway, but you sound exactly like I do.
And we recognize it, right? And I think almost all educators recognize it. But what's interesting to me is if I go into an individual school and I ask, do you believe that education needs to change? Every hand will go up in the air. And when I say, do you believe that your school needs to change? Nobody raises their hand. It's, it's the fear of embracing change and what that means for all of us. So how do we get people on board with innovation when we know that means change?
Well, I think there are two things that move a human being from where we are to kind of where we need to be. Either there's a threat, or there's an opportunity. That's it, basically. We otherwise we wouldn't change. So something comes along that threatens us, and we may see it from afar. It may be a ripple on the ocean. We've got a few years before it turns into a tsunami, so we'll just sit back and keep doing things the same old way. But very often that threat becomes imminent. And that's what pushes us to change. Or we recognize an opportunity, we go after that opportunity. So, if you look at any innovation, it was either based on someone recognizing a threat. Even the iPhone was based on Steve Jobs recognizing a threat. The threat was that, our entire business right now is living off of the iPod. And very quickly, all the other phone companies in the world are going to be downloading music files to the phone. And no one's going to walk around with two devices in there, like one in one pocket, one in the other. So one's a dedicated music device, and the other one's a phone with music files on it. So we have to make a phone. So that was based on a threat. But then there are other many innovations that are based on seeing an opportunity. Even if you go back to Gutenberg and the printing press, it wasn't a threat, but it was an opportunity to, wow, this could really change the game. So I think, we as human beings, so we go back to the school, the education system, or whatever, either there's an imminent threat to the system, or we see disruption, as an opportunity. And we say, okay, how could we create value by doing things differently? And by creating value, if we create value for enough people, we will be able to capture value out of that, meaning that it'll be business value as well for us. We'll be able to grow our own, business, because at the end of the day, it is a business. But is there an opportunity for us to create value by doing things differently? So that's really what it comes down to is, so take education, apply the four lenses. So we know it needs to change. Okay, but how do we change things? How do we innovate? Right. Well, let's challenge our orthodoxies. Let's challenge those 200-year-old orthodoxies and assumptions about what education's supposed to be. Because, it's an outdated model. We all know that. So where are the orthodoxies, the dogma, the conventional assumptions, whatever, that need to be challenged? There's that. Secondly, what are the trends that we need to harness? They could be technology trends. They could be demographic trends. They could be geopolitical trends. They could be all kinds of trends. What are the trends that we need to identify and then harness to create new value? Then third, we could say, well, what resources do we have? And I'm not talking about money, although it is a resource. But of course, we've got a faculty. We've got a body of knowledge. We've got all this knowledge that's either in books or on the internet, whatever else. We've got people with experience. How do we leverage that in new ways? And also, what are the needs? What do people really, really need? I mean, do they really need to know, Pythagoras? Do they really need to know all this stuff that we're filling their heads with? Or are there needs that we're not even addressing? I mean, Dale Carnegie back in the 1930s basically said, what we really need to know as human beings, we're not being taught in schools. How do you win friends and influence people, right? And that kind of stuff, no? Yeah. So it's really about doing. I'll give you just, if I may, Susan, one very, very quick example. Prior to COVID, I was doing a lot of management education in face-to-face events, like everyone. We do events where people come together, and in that case, it was executives that would come together, maybe 25 executives, and I'd have them for 3 days, 4 days, whatever, and I'd be doing my thing and teaching, And then COVID came along, and nobody can travel, no one can go to hotels, no one can have events. So what on earth do we do? So I literally changed the model into VR. So challenge orthodoxy. Now, why do we need to meet together in a room? What are the trends? Well, one of them is virtual reality. Could we use that? Leveraging resources. Well, I have my content. I have my style. I do what I do. Could I leverage that in new ways by using virtual reality? And then what do people need? Well, they still need at this time during COVID to know how to innovate more effectively. They need that. So, but how do I get that to them rather than them having to come to me or go somewhere else, like fly to London or fly to New York or whatever to get that thing. So we literally reinvented the masterclass to become a 5-day virtual reality master with goggles.
Wow.
And we have a virtual auditorium. We have virtual breakout rooms with virtual whiteboards and virtual marker pens and virtual erasers and virtual post-it notes. Yeah. And people are avatars and we're talking to each other in virtual reality. That is an example of reinventing education, very small way, during that period, in order to kind of innovate our way out of the crisis.
Yeah. I love that. We did something similar, that we had a online conference through the summer, that we had done previously, but just being able to leverage the opportunity that we didn't need to explain what it was anymore. Everybody understood then finally what an online conference was, and then we could reach a larger audience. I think that was super helpful. So,
but you could have done it prior to COVID, but it was like, but what's the point?
Right,
then we got COVID.
Exactly.
Now there's a threat. Right?
Now there's a threat,
we can't do it any other way. So we got to innovate. We got to innovate our way out of the situation.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to honor our time together today. So I always close with a similar question for all my guests. If there's one thing that you'd like us to know about the innovation process, just one thing that kind of would lead us and to make strides in it, what would that be?
I think it would be that human beings are tool makers. We all have innate capabilities, but by making tools, we can sort of enhance our capability, right? We can do things that we otherwise couldn't do. That's what a tool does. And the creative process can be enhanced with tools. So the 4 lenses is a tool. It's a process. It's a system. It's a methodology, but it's a tool. I mean, it's a man-made, a human-made methodology for enhancing the creative process. So by sitting down and actually using those lenses, go back to your online conference, go, okay, how do we challenge orthodoxies, do things differently? What's the trend right now? Okay, it's Teams or whatever, Zoom or whatever we're using right now. How do we leverage resources differently? Okay, we could leverage that in that new platform. What do people need? Okay, how do we address that need? How do we create value by doing things differently using those 4 lenses? So, again, that I think the learning for me is that everyone's creative. Everyone on earth is creative. We're all innately creative, but we can enhance our capability by using a power tool. And, in this particular case, a very, very powerful tool is the 4 lenses of innovation.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Rowan. It was a pleasure to be talking with you today.
Likewise. And, let's do it again sometime.
Sounds good. All right.